I didn't plan on opening the basement door that night, but some places have a way of pulling you toward the one thing you know you should avoid. And the moment I saw it at the end of the hallway, a heavy steel door sealed with warning tape and rusted bolts, my chest tightened with the kind of fear that doesn't scream, it just settles in and refuses to leave. My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 32 years old, and I explore abandoned places across the United States, documenting them quietly, carefully, never touching anything I don't have to, because abandoned buildings tell their stories if you listen long enough. And this one, the former Ridgeway State Psychiatric Hospital outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, had been silent for years. The hospital closed after a series of budget cuts and investigations that were never fully explained, and locals avoided it not because of ghosts. Exactly, but because people who went inside came back shaken, unable to describe what bothered them most, only saying that something felt unfinished. I entered just before sunset through a broken service entrance, the air inside stale and cool, carrying the smell of mold, old paper, and something faintly metallic, and I moved slowly through the first floor, past nurses' stations and patient rooms stripped bare, my footsteps muted by layers of dust that suggested no one had been there in a long time. That's when I noticed the door. It was at the far end of the main corridor, partially hidden behind a fallen cabinet, thick steel-painted hospital green, with a single word stamped into it in faded red letters: basement, and beneath it, strips of yellow caution tape that had been wrapped, torn and wrapped again, as if someone had tried repeatedly to seal it shut. The strangest part was that unlike everything else in the building, the door was clean, no dust, no peeling paint. The handle slightly worn, like it had been used far more recently than it should have been. I told myself I would leave it alone, that basements and places like this were always bad ideas, but as I turned away, I heard something faint from the other side of the door. Not a sound exactly, more like pressure, the sense of movement without noise, and my hand moved before my brain could stop it. The door opened easily. The stairs beyond descended into darkness, concrete steps damp to the touch, the air growing colder with each step down, and my flashlight beam revealed walls marked with scratches, deep ones running parallel, as if something had been dragged up and down repeatedly over time. At the bottom of the stairs was a wide room that stopped me cold. Gurneys lined the walls, at least 6 of them old and rusted, but each fitted with leather restraints that looked new, dark brown straps buckled neatly in place. The material glossy, flexible, untouched by age, and I knew instantly that leather only looks like that when it's been handled recently. I didn't touch anything. I stood there listening, my breath loud in my ears, and that's when I noticed the floor. The concrete was damp, not flooded, just wet enough to reflect my flashlight beam, and scattered across it were footprints, bare human footprints, small to medium-sized, leading from the far corner of the room toward the stairs behind me. They weren't dusty, they were wet. My stomach dropped because I hadn't seen them when I came down. I backed away slowly, my light shaking now, and that's when I realized something worse. The footprints didn't stop at the bottom of the stairs, they continued upward step by step, as if whoever made them was climbing out right behind me. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no breathing, just the knowledge that something had moved. I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached the main floor, slamming the basement door shut behind me and dragging a fallen cabinet back in front of it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely lift it, and I stood there for a long moment trying to convince myself I was imagining things, that stress and expectation were filling in the blanks. That's when I saw the footprints again. Fresh, wet footprints on the dusty hallway floor, perfectly clear, leading away from the basement door and toward the stairwell that led upstairs. I followed them without meaning to. They went up, second floor, Third floor. Each step darker, wetter, more defined, like whatever was leaving them had just emerged from water. And yet there was no source, no dripping, no trail, just the prints themselves. On the third floor, they stopped in front of an open patient room. Inside, the room was empty except for a single gurney positioned in the center, restraints buckled, leather still gleaming, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Then one of the straps tightened. I didn't see it move. I heard it. The soft creak of leather being pulled. I backed out slowly, refusing to turn my back, and that's when the door behind me slammed shut, not violently, not dramatically, just firmly, like someone closing it with purpose. I whispered that I was leaving. The air felt heavy, thick, pressing against my ears, and as I moved toward the exit, I felt the unmistakable sensation of being followed, not rushed, not chased, just accompanied, step for step, silent and patient. I didn't look back until I reached my car. The hospital was dark, still, completely lifeless. No movement, no sound. When I got home, I scrubbed my shoes without knowing why, my hands shaking, as if I had stepped in something I couldn't see, and later that night while reviewing my footage I noticed something I hadn't felt at the time. As I filmed the basement gurneys, the camera briefly tilted toward the corner of the room. In the reflection on the wet floor, behind my own shadow, were bare feet. Standing still, watching. I never went back to Ridgeway. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I hear the soft sound of something being dragged slowly across concrete, followed by the faint creak of leather tightening, and I know that whatever was sealed in that basement isn't trapped anymore. It learned how to walk upstairs. I first heard about the legend of the night shift nurse when I was researching for my podcast on paranormal hospital stories. The locals warned me not to visit the abandoned Mercy General Hospital outside Columbus, Ohio, claiming strange occurrences happened after dark. Most of the stories seemed exaggerated or urban myths until I found the old hospital records in the city archive. According to the files, a nurse named Sarah Bennett had died in a fire decades ago, but her body was never recovered. The reports said she was devoted to her patients, so much so that she refused to leave them, even as the flames consumed the building. I remember arriving at the hospital that night. The building loomed like a skeletal giant against the moonlit sky, windows blacked out, doors rusted and chained. I had to crawl through a broken service entrance to get inside. Immediately, the air felt heavy and cold, thick with the smell of burnt wood, old antiseptic, and something I couldn't identify, something metallic. The hallways were dark, my flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. Every corner seemed to stretch unnaturally, and the faint sound of wheels scraping on tile echoed through the silence. It was rhythmic, deliberate, and instantly sent shivers down my spine. I held my breath, thinking it might be an echo, a loose pipe, or my imagination, but the sound persisted. I followed it cautiously, every step on the cracked floorboards echoing too loudly, as if the building itself was aware of my presence. Then I saw her, a woman in a pale, old-fashioned nurse uniform, translucent yet fully formed, moving slowly down the hallway, pushing an enforced stand with quiet determination. Her presence was immediate and chilling. She whispered almost to herself, "I can't leave my patients." Her voice was soft but carried an unshakable weight of despair and devotion. The forced stand rattled with every step, tubes swinging unnaturally as if they were alive. I froze, unsure whether to approach or flee. Her gaze wasn't directed at me, yet I felt her awareness like a tangible force. The air around her seemed colder, heavier, pressing against my chest. The hallways that were already narrow felt suffocating. She moved from room to room, pausing at each doorway, whispering her phrase over and over, "I can't leave my patients." It wasn't menacing exactly, but terrifying in its persistence. She wasn't dangerous in a conventional sense. She was trapped, bound by a devotion that death could not sever. I followed her at a distance, mesmerized by the ritual of her ghostly rounds. Each room she passed was silent, filled with the echoes of long-gone patients and memories that seemed to cling to the peeling paint and cracked tile floors. At one point, she paused in front of a room that had clearly been the pediatric ward. Her eyes softened, and I could almost feel the weight of her grief. She whispered the words again, gently, as if reassuring the children she could no longer see. I noticed remnants of the fire scattered through the building, charred furniture, scorched walls, and blackened curtains. Yet, despite the destruction, she moved unharmed, her uniform pristine, her heart seemingly untouched by the decades that had passed. I realized then that the hospital itself seemed to support her existence. The hallways amplified her whispers, the shadows bent around her form, and the air pulsed with the rhythm of her unseen patients' suffering. I tried to speak, to ask if she needed help, but no words came. It was as if my voice had been swallowed by the darkness, leaving me only the sight of her tireless rounds. The IV stand clinked and rattled as she moved, echoing like a metronome, marking a time that no one else kept. I stayed in the shadows, documenting as best as I could, my flashlight flickering intermittently, adding to the sense that the building itself was alive. Every step I took seemed to alert her in some way, yet she never acknowledged me directly. She passed through the main nurse's station, her hands delicately adjusting papers that were long, charred, and illegible. Her whispers continued, unwavering, "I can't leave my patients." Each repetition was like a heartbeat, a reminder that some spirits cannot rest until their duties are done. As I followed her deeper into the hospital, I began to notice that the walls bore marks, scratches, and handprints that seemed fresh, as if she had brushed against them during her rounds. The thought made my stomach churn, but I could not look away. Eventually, she approached the old emergency exit, stopping as if considering whether to leave or continue her rounds. She glanced toward the staircase, then back at the corridor, her form wavering like mist in the light of my flashlight. I realized that her devotion was eternal. She had never left the building, and she never would. The fire had taken her body, but it could not take her mission. Every night, she repeats her rounds, checking on patients who no longer exist, whispering her refrain in the dark. By now, I was exhausted, heart pounding, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But the need to document what I had seen outweighed my fear. I took notes, snapped photos, and even recorded audio, capturing the faint whisper that seemed to float around the corridors. Finally, I backed away toward the entrance, never taking my eyes off her. The shadows seemed to twist around her as she passed, her presence lingering long after she moved on. The wheel of the floor stand clinked one last time, fading into the silence of the night. I escaped the hospital just before dawn, my body trembling, my mind racing with disbelief and awe. I knew what I had seen was real, a lingering devotion that defied reason and time. Even now, years later, I remember her whispering words, and sometimes when I hear the faint scrape of wheels on tile late at night, I shiver and think of Sarah Bennett, the nurse who never clocked out. She is still there, still working the night shift, bound to her patients, her devotion unbroken, a haunting reminder that some duties outlast death itself. And though I never returned to Mercy General Hospital, I continue to hear her whisper in my mind, echoing through every abandoned hallway I visit. I can't leave my patients. Her story lingers with me, a terrifying yet strangely comforting reminder of devotion that refuses to die, a presence that haunts, guides, and warns all at once. Even today, I feel her watching, her footsteps on the cracked tile, her whispers in the empty hallways of abandoned hospitals, and I know she never rests, never leaves, and will always be there, performing her eternal rounds. I knew something was wrong the moment I heard the sound, a slow electronic beep cutting through the silence of a building that had been dead for years. As I stood in the shadow of the abandoned St. Alderwood Memorial Hospital outside Dayton, Ohio, my stomach tightened because abandoned places don't make noise on their own, especially not the kind meant to measure a living heart. And yet the sound was coming from somewhere deep inside, steady and patient, like it had been waiting for me to arrive. My name is Rachel Holloway. I'm 30 years old, and I document forgotten places across the United States for a small online channel that focuses on urban decay and local legends. I had heard about this hospital from a retired paramedic who told me it shut down abruptly after a series of unexplained deaths that never reached the news. And while most people warn me not to go inside, curiosity has always been louder than fear for me, at least until that night. The main entrance was sealed with rusted chains, but a side door near the old emergency bay hung slightly open, creaking as I pushed it inward. The smell hit me immediately, stale antiseptic mixed with mold and iron, like dried blood soaked into concrete. My flashlight beam revealed cracked tiles, toppled gurneys, and faded signage pointing toward wards that no longer existed. With every step, I felt like I was walking deeper into a memory that didn't want to be disturbed. Hospitals have a different kind of silence, one that presses against your ears. As I moved through the corridors, my footsteps echoed far too loudly, bouncing back at me as if someone else were following just a second behind. I kept reminding myself that the building had been without power for over a decade, that whatever I heard earlier had to be something else, maybe a loose pipe or distant traffic. But deep down, I knew that explanation didn't fit. I followed the sound upstairs to the third floor where the intensive care unit used to be. The hallway was lined with doors marked by peeling numbers, curtains hanging limp inside rooms that had once held dying patients. And that's when I saw it, a faint green glow bleeding out from beneath one door at the very end of the hall, accompanied by that slow, unmistakable beeping. The number on the door made my chest tighten before I even stepped inside. Room 316. The door was already open, and when I pushed it wider, the temperature dropped instantly, cold enough to raise goosebumps along my arms. The room was cleaner than any other part of the hospital, untouched by dust or decay, with a single bed neatly made and a heart monitor standing beside it, screen glowing, line pulsing steadily as if tracking a perfectly healthy heartbeat. And yet the bed was completely empty. I stood frozen, staring at the monitor, my mind scrambling to explain how a machine without electricity could still function. As I stepped closer, the beeping grew louder, more insistent, echoing in my skull. And for a moment, I felt like I was intruding on something private, like I had walked in on a patient who simply wasn't visible to the human eye. At the foot of the bed was a clipboard, yellowed paper clipped to it. When I lifted it, my hands began to shake because the patient name had been scratched out violently, leaving only the room number written again and again, 316, pressed so hard the pen had torn through the page. Beneath it, a note scrawled in uneven handwriting read, "Do not disconnect." Against every instinct screaming at me to leave, I reached out and touched the edge of the mattress. The moment my fingers pressed into the fabric, the heart monitor let out a piercing scream, the steady line snapping into a flat, endless tone that felt like it stabbed straight through my ears. I stumbled back as the sound echoed down the hallway, announcing a death that shouldn't have been possible. The monitor went dark immediately afterward, the screen fading to black as if whatever it had been measuring was gone. The sudden silence was worse than the noise, thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. That's when I realized my hands were shaking uncontrollably, my heart racing like it was trying to escape my chest. I ran out of the hospital without looking back, not stopping until I reached my car. I sat there for a long time before I could even turn the key. The image of that empty bed burned into my mind. When I finally got home, sleep was impossible, the flatline sound replaying over and over in my head until I gave up and opened my laptop. I searched through public records, old hospital documents, anything related to St. Alderwood. After hours of digging, I found a sealed patient log that chilled me to the bone. Because, according to the records, patient 316 had been officially admitted 4 years after the hospital closed. And the listed time of death was 11:52 p.m., the exact minute my camera timestamp showed the monitor had flatlined. The next morning, I went back, telling myself I needed proof, closure, something to convince myself I hadn't imagined it. But when I reached room 316, the bed and monitor were gone, the room coated in dust like the rest of the hospital, except for faint handprints, smeared down the wall behind where the bed had been, as if someone unseen had tried to sit up and failed. And just as I turned to leave, I heard a whisper behind me saying, "Why did you turn it off?" I don't visit abandoned hospitals anymore, and I never uploaded the footage from that night. But sometimes, when my phone is sitting beside me in complete silence, the screen lights up on its own. And from the speaker comes a slow, familiar sound, beep, 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 reminding me that whatever was in room 316 didn't die when the monitor flatlined. It just lost its support.